All right, thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program. My guest is Stephen Willeford. He's with the Second Amendment Foundation. Stephen, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me here today.
Stephen, in times of crisis, and right now we have the double crisis of the COVID lockdown, and secondly, we've got the communist-inspired riots in major cities where you've got black neighborhoods being burned and black businesses looted and black people murdered by these rioters, all in the name of social justice. There's a natural reaction amongst American people to arm, and there's a major increase in gun purchases, and I think it's been particularly true uh, right now amongst the minority community. Um, is that the case? And what say you, Stephen?
I think people should have been arming a long time ago. We have to be responsible for our own protection. Police are great people, men and women, brave men and women that would put their lives on the line for you and your family, but they cannot always be there on time. So many times the police are there just in time to mop up the blood, take evidence, and hopefully arrest someone.
So yeah, I mean, we are responsible for self-defense, and that our police departments are not really there to defend us. They are there to respond to crimes when they're happening. I mean, and so I think that we need to understand that distinction. Now, do you think that when one does purchase a firearm, when one does you know get up to speed in terms of self-defense, should there be proper training involved? I mean, should there be licensing? Should they have a psychological test? I mean, how should that be done, if at all?
I think um, I think you should be responsible for getting some training yourself. Just understand, if you use the firearm in defense of yourself, your family, friends, your community, as I did, um, you're responsible for every bullet that you pull a trigger on. So you should be responsible, and you should go and make sure that you know how to handle that gun. I don't believe that our Second Amendment or any freedom, I don't believe you should have to pay for some sort of a training class or a license to exercise your right. I believe it is a God given right to defend yourself. But along with rights, you have certain responsibilities with those rights, and you should be able to handle it and take care of yourself and not be a danger to those around. See, death isn't the worst thing that can happen, because every one of us, you, me, and everyone out there listening, someday we will die. Death is not the worst thing that can happen, but the worst thing that can happen is you trying to defend yourself and you shoot someone innocent. That would be much worse for me than death.
Yeah, I mean, and in a sense, like, I mean, I'm a supporter of the death penalty for the states, but there's nothing worse and there's nothing more immoral than a state putting someone to death who is not guilty. We have to have very high standards of proof to if someone's convicted of a capital crime. Now, I think that traditionally in this country, it's the county sheriff who regulates gun ownership in a community, and it doesn't usually go higher than that. I know in Massachusetts it tends to be the local city and town. That's because Massachusetts is a commonwealth, and in that capacity, we give a lot of extra powers to cities and towns. And even the police departments, which often are given a good deal of leeway. And some of them are more strict than others, but and some of them certainly border on violating Second Amendment rights. But having said that, and maybe this is my kind of slightly liberal orientation in this culture, being from Boston, and kind of Eastern Seaboard sissified liberal. I don't know, but whatever. Um, I do think that the government should have some hand in regulating who actually gets a gun permit because you could have someone who is mentally ill or somebody who has a criminal record or someone who does not really you know is not really in a position and for
So
the same reason that we want to have our local governments regulate who gets a driver's license. You have to take a test. You have to have show road tests and some knowledge of the.
a driver's license isn't a right that is guaranteed you by the Constitution. The right to bear arms is guaranteed you by the Constitution. I used my example. Um, the guy that came in and shot up the church at Sutherland Springs. You know about that, right?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, that's why I'm here today, is because I'm the guy that stopped the shooter in Sutherland Springs. Okay, you're trusting a government that dropped the ball on him. He was in the Air Force. He was charged and convicted a felon uh, by the government, the very government that you want to regulate these things. He dismembered his infant son's dog in front of him, trying to get his infant son to stop crying. And then when his infant son still didn't stop crying, he beat him till he fractured his skull. He spent a year and a half in jail. And then after he got out of jail, he was still in the Air Force. They put him into a mental institution. He got out of the mental institution by escaping, and he threatened all of his commanding officers, threatened to come in and kill them. So they had him discharged from the Air Force, a dishonorable discharge. Every one of those, from a family violence, two felonies, to mentally unstable and everything else, and right down to the the Air Force dishonorable discharge. Every one of those are on that yellow form, that federal form that you fill out. Every one of them was. And yet the Air Force, being the great government that you think should be in charge of that, dropped the ball on that and didn't enter any of it into the next system. What the next system is a national instant background check system, which, since they did not enter any of it into the next system, he was able to walk into a sporting goods store and purchase a firearm. So every
Well,
one of those is a failure by the federal government to do its job. We don't need necessarily someone. I truly believe that if you have a history of mental illness or a history of having violent tendencies as he does, or as he did, that he should have been stopped from buying a gun. But it's the very government that we seem to want to be in charge of this that drops the ball multiple times and lets things like this happen. We have enough laws already on the books to stop this sort of thing, and yet they can't seem to get a hold of those.
well,
Uh,
I think Stephen, you and I are actually in agreement here because I mean, you do make the case that the government should regulate who gets to have a firearm, and in this case, they should have prevented this man from having a firearm, which he used in a very bad way. Um, the government failed to do it because the government's not always competent, but you know,
Government's almost never competent.
well, not I don't know if I'd go that far, but the point is that we ought to insist that the government become more competent, at least on a local level, in terms of regulating who, whether or not somebody who's dangerous and has a record or has mental illness should be carrying a gun. I mean, if they had been doing their job, he wouldn't have been able to get access. So, I mean, I think you're making my case. I mean, I would suggest that a law-abiding citizen, and I maybe differ with you only in that I think that there should be some basic training involved, which I'm not opposed to. In fact, I think it's a good idea even to bring gun training back to high schools
So,
like it used to be up until the 1950s.
uh,
Like firing range training and getting people to know how to handle a weapon properly and making sure that they are, past certain maybe mental tests to make sure that they're competent and functional. That these are reasonable things to put in place so that we can have a normally well armed citizenry that's genuinely qualified to be as such.
okay, put yourself in the place of a young mother that has been battered by a abusive boyfriend or husband. He's out there to get her children, and now you're telling her to be able to defend herself. Now she has to go through some sort of a competency test that is designed by who, and whose decision is it to be able. Now she has to pay for a class to go to get a license to be able to carry a gun, and she already has to purchase that gun and pay for that. So she is now having to take time away and decide whether she needs to protect her children or feed her children, because you've made it so restrictive and hard for her to be able to buy a gun and just be able to protect her children. Now,
I'm
I'm
not saying it has to be all that restrictive, but yes, I am saying that she should anticipate a problem in advance and become properly trained and then be able to really adequately train, protect herself and her children and know what she's doing. Yeah. Otherwise, if she doesn't, then she's going to put everyone at risk because if she doesn't know how to handle a gun and she doesn't know, so yes, I do think that. Now, I don't think it has to be onerous and expensive and restrictive, but I do think that there has to be some kind of a standard put in place. Yeah, I do.
well, we're going to have to disagree on this, because I personally believe there's nowhere where you have to pay for and go through a class to exercise your constitutional right as an American.
Okay.
You understand the Second Amendment isn't the government guaranteeing you the right to carry a gun or to be able to defend yourself. Instead, the Second Amendment is limiting the government the right to limit your already God given right to defense.
No, I understand that all of the amendments are negative amendments. They recognize agree a God given right. All they do is put it in language, and those things were understood by the founding fathers to be natural rights. I get that.
So, so
And I don't think that, I mean, I think there's a way that it can be done that's either free or not expensive and easy to do, just like it is when you register to vote. I mean, we all have a
so,
right to vote, but you want to make sure that we protect the sacred question of one man, one vote. We don't want to have people voting two or three times. That's one of the controversies that this country is dealing with right now with these mail-in ballots. So, I think that there
free
is
and
a
not
way to go about it
free and not
without.
expensive for you may be expensive for a single mother
So
that
then make it
has to
free. Make it
choose.
then make it free. The point, I mean,
What about the
public
time? Who's going to take care of the
public
child?
education is free. I mean, I think that it probably a local community could make this service available to
Who's going to
people
take
if
care
they
of their
choose it.
children? And how much are they going to charge while they go through this so-called class?
Well, that's, I suppose, up to the responsibility of the person involved. Look, you and I don't agree. I do think that it's reasonable that society has some standards in terms of whether a person can function with a gun. Now, the other question I have for you is with regard to the Second Amendment. What do you define as an appropriate firearm, or do we, what about military grade firearms? I mean, do we want to have AR-15s or AK-47s or automatic
Okay,
weaponry?
I got
Should
to
they
tell
be
you,
regulated?
first off, you're calling an AR-15 or an AK-47 a military grade gun, and I'm going to tell you it is not a military grade gun. AR-15 has never been used on a battlefield. never been used on an M16, which looks very much similar, used in a battlefield. And a semi-automatic AK-47 has never been used in a battlefield.
Okay.
A Colt 1911, uh, that's been used in a battlefield before, so you could call a Colt 1911 a military grade gun, or a Beretta 92, or a Remington 870 shotgun, all of them which has been adopted in the military. What the words you say are important. An
All
AR-15
right.
is a
So,
semi-automatic gun, and personally, I also believe that full automatic should be legal in this country.
all right. So then, what you said then when we talk about military grade weaponry, you seem to be agreeing with me that that should not be available to an average person.
No, no, no,
No, I'm
no.
not talking. I'm not. You say that
Did,
AK-47 is not military grade. Fine, but my
but
question
did
is,
you hear my statement afterwards?
you think
My statement
AK-47s are
afterwards.
fine, but what about military grade weaponry? What about
That,
like hand grenades? What about nuclear weapons, for that matter? What
we're
about?
talking. We're talking about handgun. We're talking
Okay,
about handheld,
okay,
and
fine.
that's
I
what the
just
Second Amendment does uh, protect, is the ability. And I just stated that I personally think that a full automatic shouldn't be illegal.
Okay,
And
fine. I just want to clarify that in other words, you do think that there has to be some regulation of weaponry. It's just, it goes beyond, if something is not a quote handgun, it can't be handled by one person, then that maybe should not be legal. So we are talking about some weaponry regulation here, right?
someone, yes.
Okay. Now, why? And again, I'm not saying I'm actually not taking a position on this. I'm trying to understand it. Why does a person need an automatic weapon? I mean, an AK-47. I mean, what purpose would that have for a person?
Oh, well, that goes back to what the intent of the Second Amendment was about. The intent of the Second Amendment, and if you go all the way back, the British were trying to stop the colonists from owning the Brown Bess, which at the time they thought was the best musket on the market. And they were trying to prevent the colonists from owning the Brown Bess, which was a muzzle loading, and it was the best. It was the M16 at the time.
Right.
Okay, without being able to own a gun like that, the colonists could not have thrown off a tyrannical government. Now, understand that the Second Amendment is not about deer hunting. It's not about personal protection. The Second Amendment was formed and put in there because they were afraid of another tyrannical government like England, and the ability to keep that from happening and keep the government from being out of check. And today, the largest army in the world is every one of us out here that are Americans that own a gun that keeps the government in check from getting tyrannical. Uh, and
No,
that's
look. I mean, Stephen, I totally agree with that and understand that. I mean, the right to keep and bear arms is a natural check and balance against authoritarian power. We have to have the ability defend ourselves against government tyranny. I mean, speaking here as a Jew, I can tell you that in Weimar Germany, the government confiscated all private weapons from the citizens because they were concerned about a breakout of civil war between communists and Nazis in the street. And of course, once the Nazis did win the election and take over, they knew that the family on the other side of the door did not have a gun because they'd all been confiscated. So they knew they could kick down the door and take them into custody. And that's what they did to the Jews of Germany and other enemies.
and and
So,
and actually before that in Russia, and
oh,
and
yeah, the Bolsheviks, absolutely. They
they
just
affected the Jewish
and
people just the same. And
sure.
and and what did they do? They collected the guns before they did that, and then they
And
murdered.
you said, and I think you're right. If you take a look at any communist country, any authoritarian country, communist China, you can't keep and bear an arm. I mean, the government has a monopoly on arms, and that they can break down your door if you're a woman who's pregnant illegally because they have a policy of only one child. They'll kick your door down, they'll take you away, and they'll force the abort of the baby. I mean, they you don't have any defense in those countries. You disappear.
And
In
even
Argentina,
recently,
which was a right wing of dictatorship, people disappeared if they were against the government. They had no defense because the country had a no arms policy. So, yes, I mean, I totally get that. I totally agree with that. And I am a staunch defender for that reason of the Second Amendment. I am simply trying to understand the degree to which weaponry, ought to be in the hands of people. I mean, I want to defend myself and my home and my family. Even recently, when we had these communist riots in cities. I mean, a friend of mine in Boston said that him and his son were sitting on the front porch with their rifles, waiting for the rioters to come because they were starting to come into the neighborhood. And I totally support that. I totally get that. You have to do that. But
remember the Rodney King riots, where they went in LA and they were burning businesses and stuff. There
yeah.
were two Koreans that owned a gun shop, and they sat on the roof of their gun shop and they held off rioters from burning and looting their gun shop. It is
Oh,
an
absolutely.
American right.
Oh, absolutely. And this case recently in Missouri, where you had this couple using guns to protect their property from these Nazi thugs, these fascists who were coming in and looting neighborhoods based on their own racial hatreds.
The
They had
fascists that called themselves Antifa, by the way.
that's right, of course. And they defended their property, and now you have this George Soros appointed district attorney prosecuting them. So, look, again, I completely get that. But I mean, I have trouble with the question of, though, as I said, the level. I don't see why they need automatic weapons. I mean, I get the fact that you need to have a personal handgun or even something more than that to
You
defend your
understand
life.
that they didn't have automatic weapons,
No, I know they didn't, and they didn't need to. I mean, if you have a handgun to defend your life and the life of your family,
and that
I,
AR-15 also was a very visual deterrent.
well, the AR-15, on the other hand, I don't understand why anybody needs that because that seems to me to be something that, I mean, when I take a look at
Okay,
these situations where you have these shooters at high schools,
okay,
they're knocking off a clip very quickly and they're killing people at a very rapid rate.
okay. Can we
Why do you
go
need to
back to
do that?
Sutherland Springs where I intervened? Okay, I ran across the street. That man had on class 3 body armor with a tactical bulletproof helmet. I ran across the street with an AR-15 in my hands, and if I had had anything less than an AR-15, I probably would have been counted among the dead myself. Class 3 body armor even stopped the AR-15 bullets. I hit him once in the left chest, once in the abdomen, and he kept coming. When he turned to his side to get into his vehicle to run, that's when I saw the opening between the bulletproof vest in the front and the plates in the back. And I put one in his side, I put one high in his legs. If I had not had an AR-15, a rifle capable of doing what it did, I probably would have been murdered myself.
Oh, it's an incredible story, and and I mean, again, I'm glad you did. I don't know if it needed an AR-15, but I'm glad you were there and you knew what you were doing, and you were experienced, bearer of arms, and you were able to use it. I mean, I think that in the aftermath of these shootings at schools, teachers who know how to use weapons should be able to bring them to school. And
Absolutely.
again, I mean, I think they should be licensed, and they should do it with the knowledge of the principal and the administration. But if that be the case, then yeah, they're going to save lives. They're going to save children's lives and their own lives, and I think that's a basic. That's important. Um, the only other thing I would ask about, and this might seem like a peripheral question, is that there is a link between gun ownership and suicide. And I say this because recently Mike Adams, the conservative columnist in North Carolina, whom I've interviewed and who I admire, and who's the author of many books, he apparently committed suicide with his own guns in his home. And there's a very high percentage of people who use their guns to do that. And I wonder if there would be less suicide in a sense if that wasn't as accessible to them. Maybe they would have had a chance to think about it. The act could have been an impulse, and it was very easy to grab a gun and do it. So, what say you on that?
I have a really unique perspective on that also because I've been working with Alaskan missions. In Alaska, the Native Alaskans, did you know they have a 280 times the suicide rate as the lower 48 states in Alaska? Their alcoholism is through the roof and their suicide rate is greater than anywhere else. And their preferred way of committing suicide is to get on a snowmobile and they ride across a frozen lake as fast as they can until it falls in. And then their families don't recover their bodies until the spring fall. I and it's tragic. No matter what your form of suicide is, it's tragic and it is out of control. And but a gun is just a tool. And if you know you more people are beat to death with blunt instruments every year. And this is FBI statistic if you want to go and check on. More people are beat to death with hammers and blunt instruments than killed with a rifle every year. And that's the FBI. And to say that we can ban AR-15s or AK-47s and that's just going to stop the problem. Look at what has happened in France. Every time that it happens in France, it's with an AK-47 full automatic, which all of them are illegal. I spoke with Sheriff Louderback from Jacksonville, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
He's now a presidential advisor on border security. And if you think you can stop guns from getting in the hands of the bad guys, you need to speak with him real personally because he, in his speech that I was there to support, he talked about that the drug cartels just over the other side of the border have a $500 billion budget. Now they're buying fully automatic, black market, fully automatic guns, and they do have rocket propelled grenade launchers and things like that. Every time they make a bust down there, it's not with just full automatic AK-47s and AR-15s. And what Sheriff Louderback said is they're getting these things through the black market right now. And they're not getting them from individuals like myself that can only get semi-automatic. They're getting full automatic again.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said, let's just look at it in real facts. That if you dried up the black market and were able to, what did I say? A 500 billion with a B dollar budget. They could take $1 billion out of that 500 billion and build the finest manufacturing plant for full automatic military scale weapons that you could ever find. Remington doesn't have that kind of a factory, neither does Winchester or anything else. They can build their own guns if they need to.
Oh,
so
easily.
if you ever think the bad guys aren't going to have guns, you're wrong. And
well,
all I'm asking is that we as good people, and we outnumber the bad guys, have the same ability to have the same kind of guns that the drug cartels have. Because if they come, the difference between this side of the border and that side of the border, and just recently, the Mexican army was met with the drug cartels and they were outgunned and they ended up having to release El Chapo's son to keep the military from getting slaughtered by the drug cartels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the difference between this side of the border and that side of the border is the fact that we can own guns and we outnumber them.
That's an incredibly persuasive argument, Stephen. And I'm glad you're making it. So let my listeners and viewers know a bit more about your organization, where they can get information about you and your group.
The Second Amendment Foundation, and you can find us at saf.org. Go out. We defend your rights to own a gun, and not let some politician decide what kind of gun you own, because I think it is very straightforward in our Second Amendment and our Constitution. Go to saf.org, and you can also find me, because I go and I train churches and schools and things to be able to set up safety response teams, and as you said, train teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Good.
training, I don't have a problem with training. And I think that if you are going to carry in a school, you better be trained, because you're
Right.
responsible for everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do believe in training. I'm not saying that. I don't believe that it must be a must for someone just defending themselves, but I do believe you have a responsibility to do it. You can find me to bring me in to speak to your church or your organization at Stephen Willeford, StephenWilleford.com.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Stephen. I want to thank you for joining me. It's a great talk. You know, it's an important issue. I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.